Today's speaker is the Reverend Teijo Munnich. She is the abbess of this temple. Disciple and Dharma heir of Dainin Katagiri Roshi, Reverend Teijo Munnich studied with him from 1975 until his death in 1990. She received formal training at Hokyoji in Minnesota, Tassajara Zen Mountain Center in California, and Hosshinji in Obama, Japan. Reverend Munnich was ordained as a Zen priest in 1981. In about 1983, she began to envision a residential practice center and community, and at its heart, a Zen residential practice for women. This came to be Great Tree Zen Women's Temple, incorporated in 2004. After an exacting search, a location was found with suitable space, and Great Tree opened her doors in 2005 in Alexandria, North Carolina. Yeah.
So in our study group that we've been doing and practice period, we've been reading a book by Pema Chodron where she talks about the bardos, although we haven't gotten to the bardos yet, but in the book, but she talks, as she has in her other books, about something called groundlessness and the value of groundlessness. In the book When Things Fall Apart, she talks about it in a chapter called Hopelessness or something like that. And she really encourages hopelessness. So when this chapter that we're on for this week, I was reading it on my way back from the West Coast, and just that groundlessness, what came to me right away, of course, was the feeling of what is happening in Western North Carolina right now. And I went back and I kind of reread what she said about the groundlessness, and then I pulled out the When Things Fall Apart and looked at what she said about groundlessness in there. And I wrote down a bunch of quotes, and I'll probably share some of them. But then this morning, I was thinking about it briefly right after breakfast. And I thought, this whole idea of groundlessness, and I called this talk When the Ground Moves. And because that's what I feel like we've been feeling here in Western North Carolina lately. I was thinking this morning about how I felt right after the hurricane passed. It was very strange because I didn't know what was happening around me at all. Great Tree was fine, and we just didn't have electricity for a couple of days, and we didn't have any internet or cell phone service for a week. So even though we had, electricity, and therefore we had water because we have a well, I knew that the river was rushing because Quinn and Joe came over the next day and told me they had come across the river and said that the post office was underwater. But beyond that, I really didn't know what was going on, but I felt this profound silence. And I heard the other day that some people reacted to this by getting out their guns and getting violent. And I thought, how could that be? But then this morning when I was thinking about, because I felt this silence, and I felt, oh, this is so nice. It was like quarantine. It was so quiet, and yet people suffer from this silence, this profound silence. And I think it's because silence really brings up our stuff. It really causes us to feel impermanence, to feel the ground moving. And of course, there's people who really suffered in ways that I can't even imagine. You know, they watched their homes getting washed away. They watched their family getting washed away. They, you know, they lost their pets. They lost their cars. They lost land, you know. Part of their land got washed away. And I mean, it's like you know, the ultimate in groundlessness. And yet, you know, there is a kind of a silence, a profound silence that's still present, I think, even though our minds don't want to acknowledge it so easily. So I started to write a poem about it. It's sort of inspired by Maya Angelou's poem "When Great Trees Fall," which she wrote for Alvin Ailey's and read at Alvin Ailey's funeral. But it's nothing close to Maya Angelou. But anyway, it was inspired by her. When the ground moves, trees and houses and people fall down, get swept away by floods. When the rain comes and comes and comes, trees and homes and people lose their grip. Roots of old oak trees let go and are pulled and pushed by the wind. When we slow down, we lose our grip. Emotions loosen and tears come. That's as far as I got. And one of the things that it brought up for me, I was, you know, just starting Sesshin kind of brought all of this, those feelings to the front. Just sitting this morning, sitting last night, and moving in silence. It brought up this sadness. And I have felt this sadness a lot in my life, and particularly through Zazen, through meditation. And I have asked, when I feel it, I have asked, what's wrong? What should I do about this sadness? What can I do about it? And I haven't, there's no answer. But this morning I thought, that sadness is always there. We just find ways to not touch it. One of the things that Pama Chodron said at the very, that kind of inspired this feeling, brought up this feeling for me. She said, at various points of our lives, we experience groundlessness acutely. And those are the times, you know, when someone close to you dies, when, you know, suddenly all those things that were so important the moment before they died are no longer important. The only thing that's important is what just happened, the loss of this person, having that ground swept away. Any time in our lives that we feel that feeling of groundlessness through something acute, like she says, and she says, moving to a new place. When my sister died very suddenly in 1995, and she was 41, and she got thrown from her horse, and you know, things followed, and she died after surgery. And my mother sent me a video. I can't remember who the speaker was, but one of the things he said is that we never just have one grief going on. We usually have at least 5. And I thought, and I started to, I had just moved. You know, and there's a grief in moving. I never want to move to a new place. Even when I moved to Great Tree, which really was a step up, because you see this place, right? You feel this place. Even that, I didn't want to move from where I was, you know. There's always this kind of groundlessness that you feel from moving. Or she says, when our children leave the house, I don't have children, but when Chimio left, I felt it, you know. Or when we receive bad news. And she says this, I don't know when this book was written, but it wasn't in the last month, but she said, a flood or hurricane or fire sweeps away our whole life in a few hours. It wasn't even a few hours, though, it was a few minutes. But, or perhaps we have to flee our homeland, as the Tibetans did, and as countless people are doing now. I saw a video of Thich Nhat Hanh where he was talking about how, you know, everybody know who Thich Nhat Hanh is? Yes, 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 yes. He left Vietnam because he was kicked out. He had started a peace village and it threatened both sides. So eventually he got kicked out, and then he went back, and then he left with the boat people. And he tells about those kinds of, he told about those kinds of experiences. But in this video, he talked about when he tried to come into the United States, but he was also a threat to the United States because he was against war. And so he said they wouldn't let him out of wherever it is they keep people now. I don't know if it's still Ellis, probably not Ellis Island, but wherever it is they keep people, they wouldn't let him out. And he had this experience of, he didn't have a visa or a passport or anything. He said he didn't belong to any country anymore. And he said, then he realized that that's just a concept anyway, that we belong to a country, or that we're a particular nationality, or that we're, and of course our cultures develop in different ways, and then we create these distinctions, but that's that feeling of groundlessness, you know, and the way he expressed it, you know, think about being in that situation. The way he expressed it, though, was an experience of complete freedom. You know, this groundlessness really brings about freedom in our lives. So people come to me sometimes and we talk, and they go on and on about how some difficulty in their life. And of course, in the course of their going on and on about some difficulty in their life, they also mention insights that they have. And all I have to do is repeat the insights right back to them, because we always have those mixed things, but we don't pay enough attention to the insights. We kind of obsess about the things that are wrong, you know. But I always say, you know, that is the true experience of what reality is. That experience of groundlessness, that experience of things are completely wrong because they're not happening in the way that we imagined them, or in the way that we thought they should be, in the way we were told they should be. We're losing our grip on our sense of control. Somewhere in here, I don't know if I can find it right offhand, she talks about how, I forgot what I was saying. How we want to, she's talking about dukkha, really, dukkha being that feeling of dissatisfaction that we always feel. I'm not good enough, or I need to do this, or if I only do this, then everything will be fine. If I only meditate and get enlightened, I don't have to suffer anymore. Suffering won't come up, delusion won't come up anymore. This idea, when Katagiri Roshi was sick with cancer, my teacher, Katagiri Roshi, and someone came to the Zen Center for Zazen instruction, and I was told that when they heard that Katagiri Roshi was sick, they were totally disillusioned about Zen. because they said, he's a Zen master. He should be able to, but that's not the point. That's not the point of this practice, And this, when I came to this practice, I thought I would immediately feel peace. Not so, when we see reality, it's not always the way we want it to be. And we have no control over anything, because things are always changing. Pema Chodron talks in one of these chapters about how she said to this Rinpoche, Tibetan Rinpoche, how can I understand impermanence, or something like that. I don't know what she asked him, but he said, well, think about us talking right now. This happened, this came up, and it will go away. And then you will walk away and something else will happen and it will go away. So it's like, if you kind of even look at it in terms of interactions that you have, they happen and then they go away, they come up and they go away. But actually it happens much faster than that. Impermanence happens so fast that we can't even see it. All we can do is just kind of feel it. And actually, we feel it all the time, but our mind says, we're not feeling this. We have control. I have control over this situation. And of course, the difficulty is that we live in the relative world where we have to be functional. If we're not functional, if we don't let our ego kind of do its thing, we'd die. We wouldn't eat, we wouldn't cook, we wouldn't work we wouldn't do what we had to do to eat, to survive. So, we have this kind of survival instinct, and at the same time, we live in things are constantly changing. And in order to, even grow food in the garden, you have to sort of watch the seasons and plant the seeds and water them. And, we have to make some discrimination about, and it's not really control, because if you've ever had a garden, you don't have any control really, but it's some kind of organization, some kind of. So, but we get kind of caught up in this. Oh, this is working. I did a good job on the garden this year, so I must know what I'm doing, We go from that to the next year when things don't work out and say, oh, I'm such a failure, But it's neither of those. It's something in between. But this groundlessness is something that is happening all the time. She's talking about the bardo of death, the bardos in general, but the bardo of death is what we tend to be concerned about, because it happens after we stop breathing. So we all want to know what that's all about and how to prepare for it. Or at least as you get older, you want to know that. But we should all want to know that, because how we live is how we die. When we die, our consciousness, in a Buddhist sense, consciousness doesn't just vanish. People still say to me, even people who practice Buddhism say to me, well, when we die, there's nothing there anymore. That's the people who have, kind of poo-pooed the idea of soul and heaven and things like that. And people who haven't poo-pooed the idea of soul and heaven, kind of, well, when I die, it's going to be great, because I'm going to go to heaven, right? Or I got to do what I can so I don't, go down, go to hell, But we don't really know. And I have a feeling that at the moment of death, we're still kind of going, not wanting to. But in Buddhism, there's a belief that consciousness, the body and soul are not a separate thing. Soul is called consciousness, or kind of spirit or energy or something. And that it, as the body disintegrates, the energy disperses and gets recycled. So when somebody says to me, what do you believe about death? I just say, well, we're biodegradable and we get recycled like everything else, And life is not something that's contained. We think it is because that's how our mind works, but we just get recycled. So in the Buddhist sense, there's about 49 days when your energy is dispersing and finding new forms. And during that time, the consciousness goes very gradually. And you can kind of feel it when you, she's snoring. When you're with someone who has died, or if you, in the Tibetan tradition, there's these readings that you can read, to prepare yourself for that transition, that consciousness transition. And also that you can read aloud to a person who has died to help them recognize what's happening. And we recently, some of you experienced this when you came for evening meditation. We recently had someone here for 5 days who had died. And you could actually feel over time their consciousness kind of not staying connected. You could, there's this practice of speaking to the person who died, at a memorial service or something within those 49 days, usually that happens, speaking to that person. And so there's this sense that there is a possibility of that connection. But this bardo, this transition that happens with the consciousness, it apparently, according to Tibetan teachings about this transition time, it brings up those feelings, those sadnesses, and those things we're afraid of, and all those things that we kind of are able to ignore in our everyday life. And if we are still afraid and don't recognize that those are creations of our own mind, then we're suffering. And I always think, what must it be like to be laying in your coffin and not be able to escape in any way? And this is the same kind of thing that we experience when we experience that profound silence, that all those things we're afraid of and all those feelings that we don't like, that we try to push away and our mind tries to find other things to distract us and to entertain us. Those things come up when we're in silence. And we try not to talk, and that talking is a nice way to kind of escape those things. Or writing. We don't write and we don't read. We don't do those usual things that we do. And then we sit on a cushion and look at a wall or look at the floor. And so, it's kind of the same thing. We sit just without moving a lot, without turning on our cell phone and checking our texts, without watching things on Facebook. Or without making a phone call, and all the things that we do. And so Zazen really helps us understand that experience of looking directly at those things that we're afraid of. And when we do that, when we look directly at it, it's like, why am I afraid of this? Does it really make any sense? Our minds naturally start to process that fear and start to recognize where the fear came from. And sometimes we don't even completely recognize it, but it still kind of goes away. Just seeing the fear is letting go of it. So the big fear really is manifests in this. She doesn't talk about it as dissatisfaction, but I usually talk about dukkha as dissatisfaction, but she talks about it as, I can't remember, kind of an agitation, that feeling of feeling agitated. Yeah. And I feel like for me, what Sazen has really helped me do is to allow that feeling of agitation to be present. And there's something that it just, agitation is impermanent too. So whatever it is that causes it in a particular moment, just look at it, just be with it, just feel it in your body. And it will just kind of go away, just like everything does, because it's impermanent. And those good feelings, we try to hold on to those good feelings. But the more when we try to hold on, then it's just our mind kind of saying, hey, this is nice, yeah, I'm gonna keep thinking that this is happening, and the moment has passed, the experience has passed. So just to enjoy the experience. And then once we realize that those experiences of happiness are impermanent, then we feel upset because, oh, I'm gonna lose this, and then we can't really enjoy it. So being in the present moment, she says something about that, and I think I'd like to read it. She says, she's very articulate about things. Well, here's a big quote. When things are shaky and nothing is working, we might realize that we are on the verge of something. We might realize that this is a very vulnerable and tender place, and that tenderness can go either way. We can either shut down and feel resentful, or we can touch in on that throbbing. Oh, here's what I was starting to think. Right now, in this very instant of groundlessness, is the seed of taking care of those who need our care and of discovering our goodness. And this really made me think about that feeling of when we, that recognition of the devastation from the hurricane. There's this feeling of, I want to do something. What can I do? And there were those people out in those areas that were really, washed away, and they were coming on, onto YouTube or whatever, and saying things. Some people were saying, oh, please come and help, and other people were saying, no, stay away, stay away, because I can only imagine it. And I didn't try to go there because I thought, I don't have a backhoe. I don't have a chainsaw. And what can we do? And sometimes we just have to be with that feeling until what we can do becomes clear. Otherwise, we just get in the way. And that's very difficult to do too, because we want to help. We want to, at least put a Band-Aid on so we don't have to look at it, When things fall apart and we're on the verge of we know not what, the test for each of us is to stay on that brink and not concretize. That whole idea of, why am I feeling this? How can I change this? What is going on? How can I explain this? And then we come up with an explanation and we go, oh, okay, I got it. So we don't, Kierkegaard, or not Kierkegaard, Rilke, Rainier Marie Rilke, Maria Rilke, says he wrote a poem. That's a he, right? The poet, yeah. He wrote a poem about living the question. you know, and I thought about that a lot. In Soto Zen, we talk about koan kufu, and my understanding of it is that it's whatever our question is. And the last dokusan I had with my teacher at the monastery, I was sitting in line waiting to go in, and I thought, what is my question? What is my question? What is my real question right now in this moment? And lots of questions were coming up. And I just kept thinking, oh yeah, but if I just do zazen, that, that'll become clear. So then I went in for dokusan, and my teacher was sitting there, and he said, what's your question? And I said, well, I have a lot of questions, but I know that if I just do zazen, that's enough. And he said to me, the question is the answer. And I thought, right. And then I went back to my cushion. It was during a sesshin. I went back to my cushion and I thought, wait, what does that mean? So then I was trying to analyze it. And I thought, oh, I'm doing this, trying to analyze this. I need to just not try to analyze it. So anyway, by the end of the sesshin, I had kind of a clue, And one of the things that I've started doing is when a question comes up, I start putting it into a declarative sentence. And it's interesting. It doesn't really answer the question, but it helps me embody the question. It's very easy to put a question outside of ourselves. And that's when our mind starts kind of obsessing about it. But if we just live the question and again and again and again, and don't try to answer it, the answers just manifest. The truth just comes up. And if you take a question, it works for most questions, it doesn't work for all of them, and make it into a statement, you kind of own it in a certain way. So she calls it staying on that brink. The test for each of us is to stay on that brink and not concretize. It's kind of the razor's edge. Things are always in transition if we could only realize it. Nothing ever sums up. Nothing ever sums up in the way we like to dream about it. The off-center, in-between state is an ideal situation. A situation in which we don't get caught and we can open our hearts and minds beyond limit. It's to stay with, she calls it shakiness. To stay with shakiness, to stay with a broken heart, a rumbling stomach, a feeling of hopelessness and wanting to get revenge, that is the path of true awakening. Because what elicits those kinds of feelings, those kinds of reactions, If we really allow ourselves to be with those, and Shikantaza forces us to do that. Shikantaza, just sit down and shut up. Just look at the wall. And you start to notice what you're doing. I mentioned this mudra and how sometimes it goes like this and sometimes it goes like this. When I would find it going like this, I would adjust it. But in the process of adjusting it, something would become clear in my mind that, oh yeah, my mind's too tight. Or if it was like this, it was like, oh, it's kind of loose. I would recognize that just from this little hand position. Or one time I found myself, and some of you have heard me talk about this, going like this during zazen. And I thought, whoa, and I pulled myself back. And when I pulled myself back, I realized that I was obsessing about something. It was like this little bubble over here, like they have in those cartoons, and all my thoughts were just like completely caught up in that. To be able to see yourself do that, it's, something in you says, oh, okay, and something lets go. It's that letting go is where the freedom is, but letting go is hard because we don't always see what we're holding on to. So Zazen is a great place to see what we're holding on to. So, if you notice you're thinking too much, people come to me and they say, oh, I'm doing it wrong because I'm thinking too much. No, hey, how many times during the day do you notice you're thinking too much? This is a good opportunity to notice how we overthink things, to learn about ourselves. Most of the time, we don't take the time to do that. I was living in a cabin after I came back from the monastery and after I just kind of gotten into the Zen vacuum for about 15 years. And then my teacher was sick and I helped take care of him and then his funeral. And after that, I forgot what I was saying again. Sorry. It just went away. So let's see, we've got about 15 minutes. I'll just keep reading what she says here. Sticking with uncertainty, getting the knack of relaxing in the midst of chaos, learning not to panic, this is the spiritual path. It's so freeing, to not be worrying about the edginess that comes up. She calls it shakiness. Not to be worrying, not to be thinking, oh, I have to do more, I have to do more, I have to do more. And we all recognize that we do this. I recognized it when I was in high school. I wrote a feature story for our newspaper about it. I think back and I was like, wow, I knew that then and I still kept doing it. So we have to kind of renew this. Sazen helps us to kind of come back, finding these moments of silence, finding these moments, even during the day. Some of you probably heard my bell of mindfulness on my telephone before we started the sesshin. And it just, sometimes, people say, what's that? And I say, well, it helps me remember to breathe. But even if I don't take the moment to actually breathe, which sometimes I decide not to, it still helps me see what I'm doing in that moment. And those, finding those moments during the day is a great gift because it's so easy to get the momentum of what we're doing. And sometimes it's easier for me to do and then to be. Getting the knack of catching ourselves. This is what I read of no, I didn't read this. Getting the knack of catching ourselves, of gently and compassionately catching ourselves. She says is the path of the warrior. This is something that kind of they talk about in Chogyam Trungpa's Rinpoche's tradition. And I don't really know what the path of the warrior is, but that's what she calls it. Noticing how we try to avoid. That's another thing we notice in Zazen, how we try to avoid. And you start to notice it more in your everyday life after you've done a certain amount of Zazen. Noticing how we try to avoid is a way to get in touch with basic groundlessness. Underneath our ordinary lives, underneath all the talking we do, all the thoughts in our minds, there's a fundamental groundlessness. We experience it as restlessness and edginess, and we experience it as fear. If we're willing to give up hope that insecurity and pain can be exterminated, then we have the courage to relax with the groundlessness of our situation. refraining is the method of forgetting to know. Okay, so let me start over. Refraining is the method for getting to know the nature of restlessness and fear. Refraining. That's what we do during sessions. Even sitting down, for 5 minutes is refraining from our actual activity. Even taking a breath when the bell rings, or stopping to say, what am I doing now? I remember the first time I was ever exposed to this bell of mindfulness idea, which comes from Thich Nhat Hanh. A friend and I were leading a study group at Minnesota Zen Center, and he had been to Plum Village and practiced a bit with Thich Nhat Hanh at that point and was exposed to this bell of mindfulness. So what we did was someone rang this bell, just went a little bell, every 7 minutes or so while we were having this study group. And when he did, we all were told to take a breath and say this little verse, listen, listen, this wonderful sound brings me back to the present moment. And then continue. And so many times during those discussions, when the bell would ring and we all took a breath, we all seemed to realize at the same time that we'd gotten off on some weird tangent or just gotten into, chatty kind of meaningless kind of conversation. And things would just shift. It would be like no one would say, well, where we left off was here, and it didn't happen every time. Sometimes we would pick up where we left off. We'd recognize that it was meaningful. So this little sound, and Thich Nhat Hanh says, do it when the phone rings. Let it ring 3 times before and take 3 breaths before you answer the phone. And it's kind of hard to do. It's not like someone calling your name and you've been trained to respond, Or if you get stopped at a stoplight, take a deep breath. There's these opportunities during the day, these things that we usually just react to or, respond to without making a shift. And the idea, of, for example, taking 3 breaths or letting the phone ring 3 times before. Let's see, you can't do that really. Something before you answer it is that when you answer it, you're actually more present with that person, not just with yourself. It really worked. Stoplight, Asheville to that, especially downtown. I remember it became so clear to me one time. I got stopped at the center of town by the museum. It used where the Vance Memorial used to be. That one's really bad, and I was so upset. And then I thought, oh yeah, take a deep breath. And I took a deep breath, and I thought, I'm not really in any hurry. Why is it that? And it's also that it's not going to change any faster because I'm upset, And it's so simple, and yet, we go there. But we don't want to take a deep breath because there's something that taking a deep breath or some fear, and that groundlessness becomes very clear to us. So I'm going to end there, I think. And anybody has any comments, we've got about 10 minutes. Yeah.
So, first of all, thank you. Then you brought up turning the question into a statement or declaration. Can you give us an example of when you've done that? Because I can think of, I'm trying to think of it, and it's really hard to get my mind there.
Well, do you have a question that you're
Oh,
struggling with?
yes, actually. What is next?
Okay,
Or like, what is next?
yeah.
That's where I
If you
feel
make it
like-
into a statement,
Mhm.
something is next, right?
Yeah.
Does that feel different? Say it.
What?
Something is next.
Something is next.
I mean,
Something.
doesn't it make you feel something to say that
Mhm.
rather than ask that? If you say what is next, it's sort of, you're sort of chasing after the question. You know what I'm saying? If you say something is next, you're like embodying the question. Doesn't it feel like that? Yeah.
Something becomes.
I mean, the fact that you say what is next means that you know that something is next.
Uh-huh. Mhm. Thank you.
And you sort of know where you, what it is too, because it really happens fast, right? Yeah. So thank you.
Mhm.
Were you starting to say something?
I've always struggled with that thought that you brought up of like, whenever you have a sad feeling or any, sort of negative emotion, just like sticking with it. And then it'll, arise and it'll pass. Sometimes I confuse myself in that process because in trying to be aware of my negative feelings, sometimes it turns into like wallowing because I'm trying to connect with that negative feeling. And sometimes I take it too far. And it's hard to notice the difference between feeling the emotion and letting it happen versus indulging it too much and, falling into depression or things like that. So, yeah, I don't know if there's a question there, but
Yeah, I
find
mean,
that point hard.
yeah, and the fact that you recognize that is part of the whole process, isn't it? You know? Because when you, even like you say it now, clearly you've been thinking about it for a while. And clearly it's something that you're, is kind of helping you. I'm sure that you're starting to get some clarity about it, even though, it's, the question is still there. And the thing that's interesting to me about what Rilke is saying is that living the question is really not answering the question, and the answers keep coming and coming on a deeper and deeper level, you know? And with that process, rather than saying, okay, well, I can't figure it out, or I have figured it out. Either one of those is a kind of grasping, oh yeah, now I got it figured out, or oh, I can't figure that out, so I'll just put it aside. But just staying with that process, it deepens the awareness of what's actually finding that middle way. And I used to say the middle way is what you glimpse when you swing from one extreme to the other. But I realized that it's not like that. The middle way is just a tiny little movement. And we take it to the extreme because we think, oh my gosh, I'm doing this. And then we go to the other extreme. And then, oh my gosh, I'm doing this. And then we go to the other extreme. But actually, when we see these things, it's just a tiny little shift. And then we don't have to go to the other extreme. So thank you for that. I'm sure that resonated for many people here.